No, I got one more.
Yeah, when are you gonna have public comment?
After this.
After this. Thank you.
So, presentations, 26. Should I maybe just stand or keep this standing?
Yeah.
Is that easiest? Yeah.
Try to talk
You
loud.
can stand wherever you want.
No, this will be just fine, and if I can just let you know when to advance.
Yep.
That'd be great. Pretty good.
Looks good.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the great introduction. My name's Patrick. I'm a aquatic invasive species specialist. I'm an aquatic biologist at the state. Been doing that for about 5 years, and I'm here to talk about invasive starry stonewort, which we just verified in the water body after the point intercept survey that you all had from Lake and Pond, I believe it was. And kudos to them, by the way. They reported right away. They facilitated a specimen. I happened to be in the area, so I could stop by, and it just really worked nicely, so we could kind of get our records done and verify quickly and get on with the response. So today I'm going to just be talking broadly about responding to new invasive species, primarily aquatic plants, and then we're going to focus on starry stonewort, which is the species we're working with here, which is new to Lake Beulah, but it has been present in southeast Wisconsin for about 10 years. It's actually where it was first found in the state, 2014 in Little Muskego. And we've learned a lot in the last 10 years, but we still have a lot to learn about this species and some of the challenges related to it. It's very different than a lot of the ones we're used to, but let's just get going. If you could go to the next slide. So this is just a little bit about me. You can see the light green on the map over there is I cover a big area. So I cover basically from the top of Winnebago all the way down to Illinois, and I solely focus on aquatic invasive species, primarily responds to new findings of aquatic invasive species. So it's pretty good that I'm here today to talk about that. I also do a lot with AIS prevention, so I work a lot with our wardens on preventing AIS presence in trade, so people buying and selling things for aquarium industry, ponds, et cetera, et cetera. And I do a lot of grant management and technical assistance on all things AIS related. Next slide, please. So, responding to new invasive aquatic plants. When was the last time this happened for Beulah? I'm assuming it's probably quite a long time ago with Eurasian milfoil or curly pondweed. Probably been 20, 25 years, right? And if it's something that you don't experience, you kind of scratch your head and you ask a lot of questions, you know, who, what, where, when, why, how. I've underlined the how there because that's something that I think about a lot. You know, how did this get in here? How did it spread? A lot of times we're never really gonna know. And it can be kind of a wasted bit of your energy and effort trying to go down that path. Sometimes you do have a smoking gun per se, but a lot of times these things spread around by boats, sometimes by waterfowl, sometimes by natural dispersal. There's a lot of different vectors at play, and so trying to pick apart exactly which one can kind of be a little bit of a waste of time, to be honest. Instead, we can focus our energy about what do we know about the aquatic plant community in the lake. Have we just had a survey? That's really lucky, to be honest. To have a new finding during a PI survey is like your gold star because that's the very next thing I would recommend to do. So you've already done that, which is wonderful. Do we have ongoing management? That's why we're here today. This is the management district, right? Is there things that we're already doing that this species considerations for it can just be bundled right into? We have an aquatic plant management plan, which will be updated, and that'll be able to capture a framework for if and when to do management of your existing things, as well as now starry stonewort. And who can help? So that's my funny little cartoon. I can help, and I'm here. And I'm also highly available. You know, like Chief said, my emails come right to my phone. I'm always got it on me, and that's what I'm here for. That's my job, is to provide assistance on this exact topic. So please reach out when you have one. Getting a little more specific, so we want to think about what exactly are we dealing with. We're going to get into species more in a few minutes, but is it a widespread species? Is it something that's not present anywhere else in the state? Well, that's going to be a lot different than something that's present in 45 nearby water bodies, which is the case with starry stonewort. Are there chances of reintroduction events based on its presence in nearby water bodies? Well, yeah, quite frankly there are, because it's a public access water body and we know how plants hitch a ride. Does the species have potential to impact navigation, recreation? Basically the ways that we utilize the water body. That's a very important point because a lot of times with invasive aquatic plants, we're used to the poster childs like Eurasian water milfoil, Phragmites, which do directly interfere with our use of the water body. Their growth phenology is to grow at the top and mat out, and that is square peg round hole for how we want to use the word, right? Luckily with starry stonewort, it doesn't really have that growth habit. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that kind of changes the way we approach it in terms of what we're actually managing for, right? Are there potential impacts to the native plant communities? Starry stonewort, the jury's still out there. We have some cases where native species increase in the lake, the total number. We have other cases where they stay pretty flat, and we have other cases where there's a slight decline. So it's a mixed bag. And then one really important one for this species in particular, are there viable control methods? And the answer currently for starry stonewort is not very good ones. No, we do not have any silver bullet or magic, concoction that we can apply to the water that's just gonna get rid of it entirely. And so that really comes into setting realistic expectations and goals, right? For better or worse, I'm just gonna say it, full eradication, you're not gonna do it. No one's done it yet. We have no data to suggest that's possible for Eurasian water milfoil, for curly pondweed, for starry stonewort, once introduced to a natural water body of significant size. If you have a small contained pond, yeah, that might be possible in some cases, but it's still extremely hard to do. So if we can take that as a known and work around it, it's gonna save a lot of time and headache in the long run, particularly in the planning process. When we start managing, we create disturbances. What do invasives thrive on is disturbance. So we wanna keep in mind that we may be inadvertently creating conditions that favor the very thing that we're trying to manage. So there's some nuance. And then we have to learn over time. Each lake is gonna respond differently, right? Every lake has a unique biogeochemical composition, unique plants, unique fish, et cetera, et cetera. And they're gonna respond differently to the presence of invasive species, which really is just one of many stressors to the water plant, right? We can say that in the same breath as things like nutrient runoff, overdevelopment, et cetera, et cetera. When we talk about starry stonewort in specific, now I'm going to start talking about starry stonewort specifically, excuse me. So one thing I'm going to emphasize a lot of times is the second bullet there. This is a unique macroalgae species. It is not a true plant. And that is very important because it greatly changes how we approach it. So what do I mean by macroalgae? I mean, we're familiar with planktonic algae, which floats around, can cause algal blooms, it's always present in the lake. Macroalgae is algae that, for its evolutionary history, grows and has actual structure, right? So the cells are connected and it looks like a plant, but it behaves much more like an algae than a plant does. One good example of that, you can see the picture of the specimen up there on the screen. You can see what looks like a stem, what looks like branches, et cetera, et cetera. They are all the same. They don't differentiate their cells in terms of leaves, stems, branches, roots. All parts of the plant function kind of autonomously almost, very similar to algae. It's a very prehistoric type species, right? And so given that, the ways we might choose to manage it or look at it or consider where it can spread are very different than an actual vascular plant like Eurasian milfoil or even native plants. If you're familiar with muskgrass, and most people are, chara, some people call it, essentially starry stonewort is the invasive version of our native muskrasses, right? So we have, I think we're up to like 14 species of chara here in Wisconsin. Starry stonewort is an invasive version, right? And so these are typically low-growing plants, macroalgae species. They're typically at the bottom of the lake, right? I kind of view it almost as the carpet of the lake in a way. It kind of holds everything together. They're actually excellent for water quality because if you can think about it conceptually, any nutrients that a macroalgae is taking up are that much less that's available for planktonic algae, which cause things like algal blooms. So if we can bind up phosphorus or whatever in macroalgae, it's actually can have some water quality benefits, and that's been shown for these species. Starry stonewort is from Eurasia, it's from Northern Europe, that's why it's happy here because we have similar climates. And it also has very specific water quality kind of thresholds almost. It needs nice water, and in a cruel twist of irony, it's actually threatened and endangered in its native range in Europe, and here it is being invasive for us. That's kind of an interesting tidbit. But the reason it's done so well in southeast Wisconsin is it has somewhat of a threshold for calcium concentration in the water in order just to be able to grow. Where we have limestone bedrock, which gives us calcium coming out our ears basically. So it's essentially able to grow here. When we think about like lakes way up north, which are much more acidic, much more tannic, it's probably not going to do as well there if and when, unfortunately, it might reach there. So that's a good way to the next slide. Actually, one more. So a little bit more on the species. When it was introduced to North America, plants do a lot of different things for as far as sexual reproduction. Sometimes it's all one plant, sometimes they're separate male and female plants. Starry stonewort has separate male and female plants, and only male plants have been introduced to North America to date. So all the starry stonewort that we have present in North America is essentially basically clonal versions of itself, either spreading vegetatively or through these very small structures. The bottom right is a good picture of it, called bulbils. We'll get back to those in a little bit. They basically function like a seed. So, some of the things that make this challenging, on the left there you have a bed of starry stonewort, and like I talked earlier, these cells are not differentiated, right? And so we can't use traditional, I'm going to talk about herbicides now, what we call systemic herbicides, where you apply it to an area of water, it affects a portion of the plant, and then it goes in the plant and translocates down through the rest of the plant. That's not possible with starry because it doesn't have anywhere else to translocate. Each cell is the same, they're not communicating with each other, right? So instead, the only herbicide tool we have is what we call contact-based herbicides. So these are things that just kill whatever they come in contact with. You can think of like Roundup, if you use it in your yard, doesn't matter what touches, it's gonna burn it off. And if you look at this patch of starry stonewort here, if we were to burn off the top part of that, because you have to have the chemical contact in order to be effective, everything that's underneath is mostly untouched. And what's gonna happen is that top part's gonna burn off and die off, and then the bottom's just gonna go right up into it. The other thing that can happen is when you start stretching the plants out, they can put a lot of energy into biomass, which will basically just regenerate even quicker. So you want to really kind of tread carefully as far as using chemicals on starry stonewort. The only contact herbicide that's labeled to affect algae is copper-based herbicides, and those are highly toxic, even at label application rates to essentially all forms of aquatic life: fish, plants, inverts, animals, essentially everything, microscopic organisms. It also accumulates in the sediment. So it's kind of a gnarly substance, and we want to really be measured about when and where we're choosing to do that because of all these kind of non-targeted pests. I would view that more of a break glass in case of emergency type option rather than an actual management tool over time. Personal opinion a little bit, but you'd also be going up against things like, can this even be permanent, et cetera, et cetera. You can just tap it once, there's a little inset that should show up.
Next slide, or?
Yeah, just hit next, yeah. So this right here is the next challenging component of starry stonewort management. That's called a bulbil. You can see it's star-shaped, that's the namesake of the species. A lot of native Cara produce these as well. And you can kind of think of it as a seed, except it's more like a tuber maybe, because it's attached to the rhizome, analogous to a root, underneath the sediment, right? And each little one of those can start a new population, and they're very small, so they of course can be transported quite easily. And so that brings a challenge when we talk about things like physical removal, which is a tool that can be used to suppress starry stonewort. However, anytime you're going to be removing that above ground biomass, it inevitably breaks, and you'll have bulbils remain in the sediment. Typically, the first thing to grow back after starry stonewort hand removal is more starry stonewort. That's just what's already there, and it's able to kind of keep regenerating as time goes along. So all these kind of tricky nuances about this species make it extremely difficult to manage and make it very important to choose when and where you might consider managing it, because we do have a lot of instances, if you go to the next slide, of management. You can actually just go to the next one. That's just an overview of the lakes in Wisconsin. When this first got introduced to Wisconsin, we really threw the book at it. We tried drawdowns, tried drying it out, we tried dredging it, we tried chemical applications, we tried dashing it, we tried harvesting it. I think that's all of them. Some laboratory experiments as well. And that's kind of where we've resulted in what I'm talking to you about today. We haven't found a good tool that is able to control it, certainly not at the lake-wide scale, and certainly not for long periods of time. We have found that some tools can be effective at suppressing it, keeping it down, which is one thing we want to try and think about when we're actually going to pull the trigger on if we're going to manage it or not. So you can see this graph here. It's really hard to see, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But essentially on the left side, you have the frequency of occurrence of starry stonewort in the water body. On the x-axis on the bottom would be the year. So that's basically a measure of how the population is trending over time. And all the colored vertical bars overlaid are management attempts. So red is herbicide, green is drawdown, yellow is dredge, blue is hand removal or dash activities. And you can see there's a lot of variability, right? We got Little Muskego, which attempted a drawdown, and then their starry went from 20% to 60% frequency of occurrence in 1 year. We don't want to try that. We also have Long Lake, which is consistently doing herbicide applications over a number of years and seeing the starry continue to climb. The one I want to point out is Pike Lake, top middle, who conducts no management of any kind, and they have a starry stonewort population that is trending down. What does that mean? That means that we have some evidence that this species, which we know does not grow very tall, does not often cause navigation or recreational impacts, and is really, really hard to manage, may integrate into your plant community without causing undue issues if we let it. Now, that's a really hard pill to swallow, because that goes against everything we're taught for classical invasion biology, right? You wanna get it early, you wanna get it before it spreads, but unfortunately, we've tried that, and we have no data to suggest that taking that approach is any better than letting it integrate in your aquatic plant community. Find a home, be present, but not be present in a way that's to the detriment of native plants, to the detriment of navigation and recreation. That's what we want to look at. You can go to the next slide. So this is going to be a time series from that Berry Lake, Pike Lake. This point intercept survey data, similar to what you just had done. Bigger dots indicate a 3 on the rake, so when the rake was dropped down, it came up with a 3 of starry stonewort. 2, 1 is the lighter colors. When it was first found in Pike Lake, 2016 on the left, 2017 on the right, you can see that it was pretty prevalent, right? A lot of 3s actually, and pretty big spatial distribution. If we go to the next slide, this will just kind of take you through present. You see 2018 a little bit down, 2019 maybe some higher presence in the north. We'll go to the next slide. 2020, very dense growth in the north. 2021, fairly sparse. Next slide. 2022, very down year, but then back up in 2023. Next slide. And then August of 24, and then last year, I do this survey every year, was the lowest we've seen to date since it was found in the lake. So that's kind of an interesting thing, right? And that's kind of what has given us this data that shows that this is possible, essentially. Again, no management of any kind conducted on the starry stonewort at this point. We can go to the next slide. So, to summarize, I guess in some words, some of the things I've just been talking about. Starry stonewort, 1, relatively short stature compared to other aquatic plants. Most cases less likely to cause navigational recreational impairments. That's not to say it won't, especially if located in shallow waters. Something that only grows 3 feet tall, if it's in 3 feet of water, well, that can be an issue. Launches in particular, an area we want to focus on. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But like I mentioned, full eradication of starry stonewort from the water bodies, unfortunately, it's not a realistic management goal. It's not something the department is supportive of attempting, quite frankly, because it hasn't been attempted. We're also currently not overly supportive of chemical use on starry stonewort for the reasons I outlined earlier. That's not to say it's not a tool in the toolbox that can be used in appropriate situations, but that's something you want to consider very carefully. And then just to put in words, the ideal scenario for kind of how we're trying to manage this species is to take a less of a no management approach. Yeah, please.
Is there anything native plant wise that can come in and choke that out?
Yeah, great question. All of those native, and it's right on the bottom there too, all of our native Chara species, those are your best competitors to starry stonewort. And there's really, it's very understudied, the topic of like introducing plants underwater. It's really hard to do, turns out. But that's something that folks have talked about. We've planned a few projects that ended up not coming to fruition, but that's certainly a consideration, you know, basically to provide that competition to keep it in check, you know. Because if you go to the next, that's actually a really good segue. What do I mean by integrated into the aquatic plant community? I mean something like this. So that little patch of light green in the bottom middle is starry stonewort, and you can see a very nice mixed plant community around there. Some of that is, of course, your Asian water milfoil, but some of it's wild celery, some of it's spoontail, there's naiads, I think, in there. And that's what we mean by integrated into the aquatic plant community without causing nuisance, right? It's present, it's not very tall, it's certainly not the only thing in view, and it's quote unquote playing nicely with them, to the extent. So, response for starry stonewort. We want to build an understanding of population dynamics in our system, within Lake Beulah specifically. We want to look at PI surveys, which we just did, wonderful. There's also things that the district or the riparians can do to help monitor around their shorelines, and we can coach them on ways to remove it safely if they're improperly, if they're interested in doing so. And we can also, you know, talk about who we want to monitor the launch. You guys, sounds like there's a lot of people down there working anyways. In sort of a containment strategy. We'll talk about that in a little bit right now, actually. So if management is warranted, we're trying to advocate for a containment-based management approach. What do I mean by that? I mean we want to try and keep starry stonewort where it is currently. So we want to look at things like launches, high traffic areas. One thing that can spread it is prop shop, right? So if we can keep the launch area, the lane coming right out of the launch clean, that's typically something we coach most groups, and there's probably 10, 15 odd groups in southeast Wisconsin doing starry stonewort, either hand removal or dash at their boat launch for that very reason. The other area we may think about is channels, thoroughfares. So I know that there's a few areas on Beulah, Jessica and I talked about, that are popular channels and thoroughfares. If there's a lot of boat traffic going over a Starry Stonework bed, that might be somewhere we want to look at some mitigation to at least keep it low so that it contains it within that area and reduces the chance of spread, right? In these scenarios where management may be warranted, we're typically trying to advocate for either a hand removal with divers or a dash. So if you're familiar with the diver assisted suction harvesting, it's basically a giant vacuum cleaner on a pontoon boat. The divers are underwater, they're grabbing plants, they're feeding them in, and removing them from the lake. Those are typically what we recommend because they are able to be selected to preserve some of the native plants that are right around it. Divers are trained, or they call us, and we can help them with identification. Suck up the Starry Stonework, leave the care, right? That's kind of the way you want to do it. So you want to build a framework to address essentially some of these things. Nuisance conditions as they arise, so if navigation or recreation is impeded because for whatever reason we had 3 weeks of all sun and no rain, like we've been having a lot this summer, and all the plants are going crazy, and Starry Stonework is in particular in this area impeding navigation. Of course we can look at considering when located in high traffic and shallow areas, boat launches, channels, these types of places are areas we may want to look at mitigation. And we also want to understand how is monitoring going to be done, because we need to know when these conditions are happening and we need to know how things are working. So there are ways that the district can do that. There are ways that you could perhaps ask the county for assistance, sewer pack, whoever it is. There's a lot of ways that can be accomplished. So here's Lake Beulah. This is the results from the 2026 point intercept survey. Garrett, again, shout out to him at Lake and Pond, was able to whip this up for us a lot quicker than I think they usually do, which is nice. So you can see we have some presence. It's mostly, so it's hard to tell with the densities here, but the blue circles are visuals only. So was not at their sampling point, but they were driving by and saw it, so they marked those down. So right away to me, and not knowing the situation in the Western Bay over there, the boat launch and then possibly those channels where the light blue is on the upper right are areas that jump out to me where I would maybe consider looking at some containment type actions to try and keep Starry Stonework low. Now that being said, I've kind of talked about all this in a containment based approach and what you can do. Doing no management of it is a valid approach. That is something the state of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is supportive of. That's what Pike Lake is doing, and that's not a bad thing. I know it sounds like a bad thing and it's uncomfortable, but that is one of the options that you have on the table. So I want to make sure to be loud. I don't want to go too long, and I know we want to get some grant stuff in, so let's just keep going. So when there's a new finding of an aquatic invasive in a water body that carries the NR 40, which is our invasive species law prohibited designation, which Starry Stonework does, the water body is automatically eligible for what we call the early detection and response grants. I'm going to call it EDR just as an acronym. This is through our surface water grant program through the state. So it's state tax dollar. It's actually from the boat gas tax that's levied on gasoline purchases. A portion of that, it's about $6 million a year that gets dispensed. Now the interesting thing, unique thing about the EDR grants is they fall outside of the typical grant cycle where you apply in this fall and you get your funding in the spring. These can be applied for on a rolling deadline. Essentially, as soon as this finding has been verified, which we have done, this is an available grant to the district or whichever organization for that matter to apply for to do activities in response to the new finding. What activities, we'll get there in a second. We'll get there right now, I keep saying that, sorry. That being said, the activities are flexible, right? So we can do things like monitoring, we can fund control, we can fund outreach and education, we can fund prevention things like increased signage or stuff like that. But the kind of caveat is that these grants have to be developed in close consultation with department staff, which would just be me. I'm the one that would oversee this grant, due to the fact that it's outside the grant cycle and it's outside the context of your approved management plan, right? So anything we're going to do with the grant, we just have to kind of talk about and settle on what we're going to do. The max award for these is $25,000, and it is a cost share grant, so it's a very important thing. So the state will put up 75% of that, up to $25,000, with the local grantee being responsible for 25%, which you could do a project at $33,450 if you maxed it out, right? What can the match be? The match can either be cash, so you cover that portion of the expenses, and we can also do things like in-kind donations. So volunteers, people monitoring citizen work can be used as a base.
I have a quick question. In the few hot spots that we have in Lake Beulah,
Mhm.
I know our weed harvester that the management district has is only allowed to go so far below the surface
Right.
to harvest. Could something like that be used with a permit to pull this stuff out of our lake?
That's a good question. That would be something we'd have to talk with Heidi, Heidi Bunkbouch is
Yeah, I know
the
Heidi.
aquatic plant permitting coordinator. What you run into there, given the short stature of the species, is that you wanna be careful that you're not actually hitting the bottom. So if you hit the bottom, it turns into dredging, and that's a
Right.
whole nother thing. There are plenty of lakes who have starry stonewort who continue their harvesting operations. Sometimes we suggest amendments. We were just working with Whitewater Lake. They found starry stonewort this year as well on some harvesting amendments in some shallow water. They're gonna do a less deep cut to kind of not disturb the starry stonewort. Now that being said, if there was an area where starry stonewort was kind of going nuts and growing really tall, harvesting certainly could be a tool. I wouldn't do it in a preemptive manner.
Is that something we could work with you to, for our specific lake?
Yeah. We'll have to work with me and then also Heidi, yeah, permitting aspect. But that's absolutely, we'll be talking through and kind of decide, get a much more granular look about when and where and how, absolutely. So yeah, that's the grant stuff. I guess to kind of put a bow on it,
So I'm sorry, so
Yeah, please.
to get 25, we'd have to spend 8.
essentially, yeah, 8 and change, yeah, yep. And another really important facet is there is no real like time limit on when you have to do this and then oh, it's gone, that doesn't exist. This is available now for the water body since the finding. If you wanted to apply it tomorrow or from 5 years, both are still valid.
Is that an annual amount?
No, it's a one-time grant. Occasionally, we can entertain a second, especially if it is, for like a plan update or something like that, but it's not a continual kind of source. So kind of my recommendations, short term, you can consider DDR grant. Again, this is not something you have to do, but if you wish to, some of the activities that I was thinking of that would be warranted at Beulah could be primarily at the launch. We did observe a small amount kind of under the pier there, and that could be something that probably could be relatively easily removed, and you may not even really have to hire someone if you could figure out a way to do it yourselves or get something we can coach you on or something like that. I've coached other groups on that. Monitoring and then perhaps considering some minor removal at the launch in particular as your main thoroughfare of the water body in a containment-based approach. We could also consider the channels, but I also want to keep in mind we don't want to overly disturb things, right? I would probably recommend another full lake PI before your 5-year update. Probably split the difference either in year 2 or year 3, just to keep tabs on the lake-wide spread. That can be funded by the grant. And another thing you can do is outreach and education. If you want to create educational programming or host a training day for folks around the lake to learn about starry stonewort, and there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go with that. Some folks choose to go that route, other folks choose to not put those in the grant and just kind of do it their own way, how they do whatever, outreach to the group.
Patrick, how are you able to have data on a yearly basis when people like us only do it the mandated 5? How are you able to have annual data?
Yeah, so Pike Lake is our main reference lake for this species. So we staff it ourselves to go out there every year and
The
conduct
DNR
that
does it
survey.
themselves.
Yeah, so we have a handful of, we call them long-term trend water bodies for both starry stonewort and Eurasian milfoil, to do these long-term trends so we can see how things are
You
going.
wanna adopt us?
Not my call, but we can always certainly try and do as many as we can.
Are these slides that you're showing us and the maps and stuff, are they available online to view somewhere?
It's gonna be.
I gave them to Jess already.
Oh.
It's gonna be on our website.
Okay,
Either or later.
alright.
Sure.
Do you have a hypothesis regarding Pike Lake
Mhm.
and the overall decline that you're seeing? Have you looked at temperature differences, winter weather,
Sure, yeah.
calcium levels?
All of these other factors that
Yeah.
can, and that's the tricky thing with any environmental work, is there are so many variables, it's impossible to control for them all. I have not personally, I believe some others have, that, I'm not aware of what kind of those results are. And I think it's something that we would like to spend a lot more time looking at, but we are, just like Chief was talking about, we are very tight on staff and capacity at this time.
One other question, what is the maximum depth? that
Sure.
starry stonewort is able to?
Pretty deep. We've seen it 20, 30 feet down, but that's gonna be more dependent on the light availability in the water body. Aside from Cara, we also have a native muskgrass for stonewort that's called Nitella. And that is typically very deep in the water body, sometimes up to 50 feet deep. It can do really well in low light conditions. And we'll often see starry kind of coexisting with Nitella. In fact, I know when Garrett was out, had a few interesting huge Nitella plants. He was like, it kind of looks like starry stonewort, and then I was able to figure out that it wasn't. So it can be very deep. It can also be quite shallow, but like most things, if that shoreline zone with wind and wave action, there's not a lot of plants that are growing first kind of few feet of water, depending on the location, but it can be quite deep.
I think you had mentioned that it grows like 3 feet deep, but it can grow taller. Is there a certain like observed cap, or how high can it go?
I know, and I've heard, this is just anecdotal, but in the state of Michigan, where they've had it for, I think, late 90s maybe, they have some water bodies where I believe it's 6, 7 feet tall. The one lake I've seen in Wisconsin that has a really high frequency of starry and it's really tall is really small impounded Trout Street in the middle of Marquette County. How it got there, we don't know, but it's a lake I've tried to do some research on, some of the underwater filming shots you saw in here, some of the work I've done there, trying to look at, this isn't like published or anything, sorry, not time, but are fish utilizing starry stonewort? I've got a lot of videos of fish kind of feeding amongst starry stonewort, hovering over it, kind of making it their home. But that is one thing to keep in mind, it does have the potential to grow tall.
Do we know why, or like what?
Yeah, it seems that in the cases where it does, it is based on being disturbed, essentially. When you get in a kind of a repetitive cycle of you've disturbed it, now it's growing tall, now we have to disturb it again just to get it knocked back. And so that's kind of part of